We're going to get started. Thank you all for being here this morning. My name is Elizabeth Nagley, and I am a senior manager at TNTP. And just like in June, if you saw me live or if you watched the recording, I am thrilled to be here with you today, talking about science instruction, which is my favorite topic to explore, and helping you all to think about how you support your science teachers to ensure that the students in your classrooms and your school have meaningful experiences in their science classrooms. During our time today, we are going to revisit the TNTP science tools that you saw in June. And our purpose in looking at those today is to help us to internalize a shared vision for what excellent instruction looks like. And then to begin to think about how you can use those tools to develop the science teachers in your building. Okay, so as you know, this is day one of 2 days of training this week, and this builds on the content from June. We're going to spend our time today focused on science, and then our time on Thursday, we're going to continue with math. In total, we have 3 hours together today. And when we look at the agenda, you're going to see that we're sort of really treating this time as one continuous 3-hour session with a 2-hour break in the middle. Okay, so I know that you've already had an introduction to the tools, and so we're going to use our time to really build on that knowledge and go deeper with them when we think about application. And so we're going to spend a few minutes on housekeeping, and then we will dive into some content. Okay, and so I wanted to introduce my teammates who are here with me today. First, my other TNTP colleagues, Krista, Katrina, and Stephen. And if you all just want to come off mute and say hi so your face pops up in case you're only seeing one face at a time. Krista, do you want to get us started?
Hey everyone, excited to see you guys again.
Same here. This is Stephen from TNTP. I really appreciate everybody being here. I know it's a busy summer, but I think it's gonna be a great training over the next 2 days.
Good morning, everyone. So glad to have you join us. I'm sure you will learn a lot and have a lot of great information to take back to your schools with you. Thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks, y'all. And so you'll hear them chime in from time to time. Katrina is going to monitor our chat today, and she may jump in and interrupt me with any questions that I've not seen in the chat that would be helpful for the whole group. And they'll also help out with logistics. So if you have questions about accessing any of the materials or the content, definitely put those in the chat for them to respond to. Okay, same session norms as our last sessions in June. Stephen is recording, and for that reason, we ask that you keep yourself on mute to just take out any of the background noise for the future if anyone's watching our recordings in the future. And I'll also give you just a minute to read over those and to close out anything on your computer that might be unnecessary that you don't need during this time. We're also going to spend a lot of time today in practice, looking at artifacts, looking at videos, looking at assignments. And so I really recommend that you have some paper and a pen or a place to just take notes on those artifacts that we're looking at. We'll have time to talk in breakout groups, and you'll want to be able to justify your evaluation or your rating of those artifacts. And so you'll definitely want some places to just jot down some notes on what you're seeing as you look at the sample artifacts today. And today, last piece of housekeeping, I think today, actually all the materials for this week can be found in our STEM teaching toolkit. And Krista, if you want to put that link in the chat, you can click from the link, the bit.ly link in the chat to access it, or you can scan it with the QR code with your phone, and that will take you to all the materials for today, actually, and Thursday. So let me just show you to make sure that you're at the right place. So when you get to the Google Drive folder, you'll see that there's this STEM teaching action planner, and you're going to use that today. And you'll also use that on Thursday to collect some of your reflections and next steps. And then all of the materials for today will be found in the science folder. Krista will put direct links in the chat as we go, but you can always just go back to the folder. And I really recommend in the STEM teaching toolkit that you download this STEM teaching action planner, because you want to be taking your own notes that you're using as we go. So those are our materials. I think you have what you need then to get started. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit more what we're going to do today. When you registered for today's session, we asked you to fill out a survey And one of the questions in the survey was, what were you hoping to get out of our time together? These quotes on the slide are a few of the comments that we heard in that survey, and they highlight some of the common themes across the registrations that we had. We really heard that folks wanted additional practice with understanding the shifts and the framework of the standards as it relates to math and science, to make sure that when they walked into a science or a math classroom, they knew if the learning was grade appropriate and was putting kids on track for STEM careers. And we also heard that you wanted to think about how you can use those tools in practice with your teachers to support them in improving instruction, because it's great. It is really important as a first step to have a clear vision for instruction in STEM classrooms, but having that clear vision alone won't necessarily result in improved instruction in your classroom. So I want to make sure that you've got opportunities to practice with those tools and think about what feedback could sound like in developing your teachers with those tools. With that in mind, here is our agenda. We are going to begin today exploring the importance of having a shared vision for STEM instruction. And then we'll use our science tools that'll help us to understand where we are in progress towards that vision. And then we'll do some practice coaching teachers using a case study, which would help us think about how we could use those tools with our teachers to improve their instruction. And then along the way, you'll have time to pause and reflect using that STEM teaching action planner that I showed you in the Google Drive. If you are like me, it doesn't have times on there, and you might want to know where we're going and where we're going to break and be able to project what the next 90 minutes will look like, I will tell you that we're going to spend the first 90 minutes here together on shared vision and then grade appropriate assignments. And then in this afternoon, we'll come back to strong instruction and the case study. I'm going to pause here. That's all of the housekeeping. Then we'll move into strong instruction. So let me see if you have any questions. And if you are good, you've got your materials, you know where you're headed, you can give me a thumbs up. Great. Okay, I see lots of thumbs. Okay, so I thought it was important that we ground ourselves in what we're talking about when we say STEM instruction first. Right? In order to have a vision for STEM instruction, we have to have a shared definition for STEM instruction. And I think that we all know that STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We're clear on what the acronym is. But I think outside of the world of educators like you who are really deep in this kind of work, when I talk about STEM and the work that I do, people tend to primarily think about the T or the E, or really picture things like computer science and robotics, which are definitely part of STEM, but it's not all of STEM, but it is the part that is largely in the public eye. And which is why I included this quote from Katherine Johnson, who was famous NASA mathematician. Her life is the basis of the movie Hidden Figures, which really highlights the importance of not just thinking about strong CTE courses, which are often applied math and applied science, but also thinking about strong experiences in the foundational core content of math and science as well. And when we met with some of our deep dive partners who a lot of you are working with ongoing throughout the year, we really heard them echo the importance of strong foundational content in math and science so that kids are able to access the content in programs like BioBuilder or If I Had a Hammer, that having strong experiences in their math and science core classes enables them to access that content and prepares them to engage in those sort of careers. Moreover, if we're thinking about STEM careers, we know that most careers in the STEM field are an overlap of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and don't necessarily fall within one of the four areas. I'll give you a minute just to look at the career diagram on the slide and take a look at how many of these careers are actually in the overlapped section of the Venn diagram, which includes things like biomedical sales, which is an overlap of science and engineering and technology, or software development as an overlap of tech and math. And so if we think of if we keep our understanding of STEM teaching limited to applied math, applied science, or just CTE, we're really missing an opportunity to expand our students' access to the vast range of STEM careers that are open to them and helping them to understand the many different pathways that they can take using their interest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So a quick review on what you saw in the opportunity myth in June connected to STEM careers. When we did our interviews for the opportunity myth with students across the country, we heard that students had big goals for themselves. And this slide is one of the slides that's in the opportunity myth briefing materials that we share with educators all across the country. I think it's really interesting that we see that 2 of the 4 students profiled in those materials had big goals for themselves that were connected to STEM careers. These are just 2 of the 4 interviews that we did. And we found that their experiences and their goals for STEM careers were pretty common. We're not unique to these 4 students that we profiled on in our presentation. From our research, we saw that students in every district of our study had big goals for themselves. Almost 95% of them wanted to attend college. And we found that that finding really held true regardless of student racial or language background. And we also saw that these same students, just like all the students that we surveyed, just like the students on the previous slide, have clear career aspirations and are making their choices now to achieve those goals. We saw that by the time students got to high school, 70% of them had a concrete career goal, which often required a 4-year degree and was often in a STEM field. So how do we get our students to access their aspirations for college and career? During our June trainings, we shared these findings. We found that students needed access to 4 key components that influence outcomes and help students achieve in the school year. The first is access to grade level assignments. And grade level assignments are assignments that give students a chance to meet the demands of the standards. Students need access to strong instruction, which was instruction where students had to do the majority of the thinking on the grade level content. Students needed to be deeply engaged, which involved students sharing that they found that the work that they were working on was interesting and enjoyable, and they enjoyed concentrating deeply on it. And they needed to have teachers with high expectations, which meant that teachers reported that they believed that their students could meet the demands of the rigorous standards and do grade level work. So if we know that those are the 4 key components that kids need to have access to in school in order to be on pathway for college and career STEM, the next question, I think that's a logical question for me, is like, well, what does it look like in a school where kids have access to these 4 things? And so we found that the schools and classrooms that provided students with the strongest instruction tended to have a few traits in common that can be useful for us as we begin to think about what it takes to improve student experiences at scale. And so the first thing that we heard was that classrooms and schools that had a clear vision for excellent instruction were more likely to provide students with access to the 4 key resources. School leaders could name a set of concrete instructional expectations, and teachers in the school would name the same set of expectations for instruction that the principals would name. So there was alignment between the leaders and teachers on what instruction was expected to look like. The second thing that we saw was that these visions of excellent instruction tended to focus on putting high quality content in front of every student and expecting students to do most of the work and thinking in the class. However, the very best schools in the study went further. They paired the clear instructional vision with strategic supports to ensure that teachers could meet the vision by putting the content in front of kids, putting strong instruction in front of students, and then believing that they could do it. So for instance, we saw that administrators at these schools were frequently in classrooms in entirely non-evaluative roles, simply to offer teachers coaching and support and to help teachers reach the vision that the schools had set. They also tended to provide teachers with frequent opportunities to meet and think deeply about what the materials and the standards were asking of students, where their students were likely to get hung up, and how teachers would address those potential hangups without watering down the rigor called for by the standards or the materials. And by providing these clear expectations and strategic supports aligned to those expectations, schools are able to support teachers in holding high expectations for their students. So let's talk about what that looked like specifically in a science classroom. Like we said, our strongest schools provided students, had a clear vision for what excellent instruction looked like, And those are the ones who are most likely to provide the 4 key resources. In these schools, teachers could speak fluently about a shared vision for excellence. And those explanations were often tied to a written document that served as a foundational grounding artifact for the department or the school. And so I think the important word here, right, is shared vision for excellence. I think if you ask teachers in your buildings, I'm sure that they can tell you the things that they believe make strong STEM instruction in their classrooms, right? The importance here is that it's a vision that is codified and shared across the school or the department, and that's an important first step towards achieving strong outcomes for students. So in your, I think Krista, you just put the link in the chat. In your STEM teaching toolkit, there's a folder that's called Shared Vision. And in this folder, there's a document that's called Columbus Vision of Excellent Instruction in Science. I'm going to go ahead and navigate your way to that document right now. It looks like the picture that's on the screen. This is a vision statement for excellent instruction in science from a group of K-12 schools. It's just one example of how teachers and leaders can come together around a shared vision. So I'd like to give you a few minutes to read this vision statement and then to begin to think about what the status of shared vision is in your buildings. So you've got 5 minutes to read the statement. I'm going to put some guiding questions up there for you to think about as you read. And then after you finish reading, we're going to head to breakout rooms for discussion around shared vision. So here are the questions. And so I'll leave them there. And then let's take, like I said, 5 minutes to review the statement and to jot down some thoughts around the questions that are on the screen before we head to breakout rooms for discussion. Okay, that's not 5 minutes to look at the statement and to begin to think about the questions that are on the slide. I also put them in a chat for you. We are going to head to breakout rooms for about 6 minutes for some introductions of who's in the group and to also chat about the status of shared vision in your school. And so we've looked at a science example here, but we're really thinking about shared vision across all parts of STEM, thinking about mathematics too. So feel free to share your reflections around shared vision for math and or science in your breakout groups. And then when we come back, we will do, you're gonna be in groups. I'm gonna cold call on a couple of groups just to share out one thing that you talked about in your discussion. So if you want to go ahead and identify one person who's gonna be your speaker when we come back, that would be helpful. And then Stephen, you're gonna send us to breakout rooms and we'll be back in about 6 minutes. Okay, great. So everyone is back and maybe you saw that you were in scientist named breakout groups. And so I'd love to hear from 2 groups that like a quick highlight from the conversation that you just had around shared vision. So if someone from the Jemison group could come off mute and share something that you talked about in your breakout room, that would be helpful. That is Amanda, Amy, Brittany, Cody, and Melissa.
We really started and we talked about the first question of what extent is your team grounded in shared vision for math, science, and STEM. And a couple of people in our group, we were a mixed group of middle school and high school, said we weren't really grounded. That's why they wanted to expand. We also talked about how in our middle school programs that we want to really explore on how we can support the high school programs and how we can give more exposure to our students so that they can start developing choices and start experimenting before they get into high school and be more in depth in high school.
Awesome, thanks, Ray. And what a great opportunity if you're partnering with some of our deep dive partners to explore some of those STEM career fields that they can start to engage in science and beyond. Okay, and then let's hear from someone in our Curie group, which was Beth, Mira, Paula, and Stephen.
We went through each question and we found that the biggest focus for us at each school is with the STEM is starting to combine the different subject areas for the cross-curricular concepts. It seemed to be new. And we also looked at the challenges coming from COVID, which was the last question. That was just trying to get the students working back together and following the big ideas.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, I think that there, someone else want to share? Yeah, so we've spent a lot of time in today and in Tuesday session really talking about some like the structure of the science standards, but there's so many pieces of the framework of those standards. And we think about the cross-cutting concepts, the science and engineering practices that are really relevant across lots of different CTE and STEM classes. So it's a great opportunity to think about how you can put those into practice as a common shared element in a vision. And like you said, developing some of those routines around collaboration and exploration, being back in person fully again this fall. So, like we said, having a shared vision is the first step, and it helps us to prioritize in the decisions that we make in our schools. It serves as the North Star when we are providing opportunities for development and learning for teachers. And it also can serve as a rallying cry for teachers. They have a shared idea and a purpose behind where they are moving with their classroom, which helps them to understand why they're doing what they're doing and provide strong justification for the choices that we make. I want to make sure that today and Thursday you have an opportunity to learn, to reflect, to discuss, but are also leaving with some ideas of what you want to do next, right? So if you're at a place where you maybe have a vision, but it's not shared, or you don't even have a vision drafted yet, but you want to get that done in the fall, I want you to give you a place to capture those ideas and to be able to take those with you moving forward. So in your Google Drive folder, like I showed you, there's this STEM teaching action planner. And this, like I said, is a document that we'll use to jot down notes today and on Thursday. And so on page 1, the table looks like this. It shows the section for develop a vision. Got 3 columns to think about these 2 guiding questions here. Do teachers have a shared vision for science instruction? Do teachers have a shared vision for excellent instruction in math? And then how do you know what were your next steps and what resources or strategies might you want to incorporate to move closer towards a shared vision for math and science? And so I'm going to give you 3 minutes now to jot down some of those notes, some things you heard in your discussion group, and then some things you want to remember to take action on after our time together this week. So why don't we take until 10:35 to jot down some for individual reflection, to jot down some notes, and then we will hear some ideas of what your next steps might be. Okay, and if you jot down a few next steps, I think it would be helpful for us to, as a group, see what other folks are thinking about. So if you want to type, if you could, please type one of your next steps in the chat and share that with everyone so we can just kind of scroll through and see what folks are thinking about right now as it relates to vision. Whenever you're ready, you can put that next step in the chat and go ahead and hit enter so we can see it. So I'm seeing that folks are are sharing some ideas of wanting to convene teachers, to get teachers together by department and start to discuss what a vision could look like or something. And that can be really hard because it's really wide open. You just get together and let's get together and write a vision. Like, it takes a really long time. So I definitely think that, like, using a vision statement like this sample that you have to begin a conversation can be really helpful. And using this as, like, what would you add? What would you change? What would you revise? What's important for our students in our community, I think is a good way to begin to have the conversation. And definitely want to think about when and where are the opportunities to do that. So if they're going to meet together, when do you have time in your summer or back to school PD to be able to do that? Who do you want to task as the person who's in charge of making sure that it comes together, and that it is a living document that folks are grounding their work in this year. So I like the idea of collaboration, and then also thinking about what would a process look like to go through to actually have a finished vision statement at the end. And if this is something that you're really thinking about, or what questions about how to proceduralize, I don't know, plan the next steps and how you want to do this, my email address is, like, thrown in this PowerPoint a couple of times. Feel free to, like, reach out to me with questions, and I can also share other sample vision statements with you so that your teachers can maybe compare some different vision statements and think about what they like, or what they would want to include in your own school's vision statement. Okay, so we're gonna move on to talk about grade appropriate assignments right now, and this really connects to what we've talked about in the visioning component, because if you don't have a written vision statement yet, and you're not really sure of what's important to include or what strong instruction looks like, the TNTP tools for grade appropriate assignments and rigorous instruction can be really helpful for you in creating one. So if you looked at the language of the Columbus vision statement, there's a fair amount of overlap in the language in what we saw in that statement and then what's in these TNTP tools. And so I want to be clear today that as we move forward with this time and in the afternoon, that our purpose, our goal here is not for you to leave being able to, like, correctly circle the right yes or no, give it the right 1, 2, 3 score on everyone, but is to practice using the tools, because it helps us to internalize what excellent instruction looks like. It helps us to clarify what actually is our vision for strong instruction. So we're not really focused on the technical work. We're instead using this as an opportunity to deepen your internal understanding of excellent instruction. And then the more you practice using these artifacts of sample assignments and sample classroom observations, you will build your own internal barometer and equip yourself with a content-specific framework for thinking about what you should see when you go observe in these classrooms or you work with these teachers. And then as you have a tool to guide your thinking about science instruction, it's also going to help you to prioritize areas for development and high leverage feedback for your teachers. It's going to equip you with the language that you need to help develop your teachers to move closer to the vision that you have for your students. Okay, so we are going to start with grade appropriate assignments and the grade appropriate assignments tool. So go ahead and access this tool in your STEM teaching toolkit. It is called the grade appropriate assignments tool. And I know that you have seen it before from our June training. So I'm going to give you just 1 minute to make sure you have it open and to just skim through the sections again, because we are going to go through it in depth. So go ahead and do that now. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to get that open and reviewed. Okay, so as you may remember, the tool is divided into 3 main sections to evaluate the content and the practices and the relevance of the assignment. Before we get into the chunks of it, I think it's really important that we understand and just talk about name why we do grade appropriate assignments first and not instruction first. When I think a lot of my time as an assistant principal coaching teachers, I spent observing teachers' classrooms. And so I would create my schedule, would go see my teachers. And I did not always look at the assignments or tasks that were being put in front of kids first. And for science teachers, so much, and I know this is why too for a lot of other content, like so much of these are teacher created materials. I don't have, they're not coming from a source where it's been rated as strong materials. So teachers are creating these materials first, and I wasn't often looking at them before I would observe in classrooms. And it was pretty common that I would get into the classroom, watch the lesson, look at the materials that were in front of students. And then I would find myself like thinking like, oh, well, the most important next step has to do with the way that the teacher is planning the lesson and how they're making these worksheets that they're putting in front of kids. And that's can be really frustrating feedback to deliver and frustrating feedback for a teacher to receive, because know that all of our teachers just want to do the best that they can as teachers and for their students. And if they had known to make the assignment closer aligned to the standards or to include a certain aspect of relevance, they would have done so. So I think it's like really important that we think about finding opportunities to take a look at the materials that are getting put in front of kids ahead of the lesson to be able to share that feedback with teachers before the lesson actually occurs. And I also find that like the rigor of the instruction is often dictated and constrained by the rigor of the materials. So if the materials don't ask kids to reach the depth of the standards, it's much more challenging to have the instruction that happens with the lesson also meet the depth of the standards. So if we want them to meet the demands of the standards, their plans and the student tasks have to start there. So for that reason, when we think about access to the 4 key resources, we look at assignments before we start to think about classroom observation. Okay. So we already looked at content during our June trainings. Of the 3 sections, that's one that we spent the most time on. And if you recall, to rate on the content section, we think about if the assignment targets a grade level standard in an appropriate way. There are, and I'm not going to go through this in the same level of depth, but just a quick overview of content, the 3 content questions. So I'm going to give you that before we move forward in practice. So the first question that we think about for content is, does the assignment focus on 1 or more grade level standards? And then to answer this question, the first thing we did was we looked at the content of the assignment and compared it to the Tennessee grade level standards to find which assignment it aligned to. So if you remember, the first one that we looked at was like the model of the planets. And we looked up the standards and we saw that different aspects of the planets weren't actually 8th grade standards, those were 3rd grade standards. So the first thing we do is try to find the grade level standard content aligns to. The next thing that we did is, which is the second question here in the yellow box, is consider if the depth of the content knowledge is appropriate for the grade level standard. And so we looked at the disciplinary core idea matrix, and that's in your folder. And it's also linked in the tool itself to know that like, is what we're learning about the planets the right information for 6th through 8th graders? Or is this pushed? I think more often than not find that the content pushes beyond into the high school level when it doesn't not yet need to, because teachers are so used to helping kids to memorize content, they want to give them more to memorize, right? So it gives it the right depth of knowledge for the grade band. And then finally, we considered whether or not the assignment is anchored in a phenomenon or a design challenge to help students make meaning of the content. So the example, one of the examples we looked at before was also like an earthquake on a mountaintop, and they use that to then think about plate tectonics. So is there the presence of a real life occurrence that kids are going to make sense of as they develop their content understanding? So we are gonna jump into some practice. What we're gonna do with our time left this morning is we are going to look through 1 sample assignment altogether, and then you're gonna practice with 1 on your own. So we're gonna start with this 6th grade assignment in your folder. It looks like this picture that's on the screen. It's a couple pages long, and we're going to use all the pages counting us out 1 assignment. And I know that some folks are more comfortable with the science standards, some folks are less comfortable with the science content. So starting with middle school as hopefully a good entry point for content knowledge for all of us. And we're going to use this example to practice. So go ahead and make sure you have this assignment open on your computer. And when you've got this hands rubbing together, energy and motion task open, if you could just give me a thumbs up. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Jack. Okay, so like I just said, when you rate on content, you use these two documents. You use the Tennessee Science Reference Guide and the Appendix E, the Disciplinary Core Idea Matrix. And I want to just give you a shot at it, trying to answer these three questions. So I want you to take the next 3 minutes to use these documents and that assignment to figure out if you would say a yes or a no for those first three. I'm like, go forward and then go back for these first three questions on content. I'll put this up so that you can reference the documents. Take 3 minutes to rate this assignment on content. Okay, I'm going to talk you through my thinking on how to rate this on content, even if you didn't have time to finish, so that we can continue to look at the sections of practice and relevance, and then you've got time to practice with one on your own. This assignment, it gets a yes for which grade level standard it aligns to. So the assignment aligns closely with 6PS31, which focuses on comparing different sources of energy. We saw that kids are learning about potential and kinetic energy in the task, and then talking about transformations between the different types of forms of energy. For depth of the standard, this assignment also earns a yes. If you take a look at if you looked at the DCI progression, you had time to get to the DCI progression in Appendix E, you would have seen that for energy, it focuses on understanding that energy can change forms and that these changes can be tracked. Okay. And then this assignment also earns a yes for making use of a phenomenon. So it starts with the engage activity, which is about students rubbing their hands together faster and slower, and then thinking about how they can use the content to explain that phenomenon. So it's not as rich of a phenomenon as the ones that we have saw in the June sessions, but it is still a real life example that you can use to help kids make sense of the content. So that would give this a 2, which is sufficient opportunity. I think it's important to name that it's sufficient opportunity. It doesn't need exemplary assignment, but kids do have access to grade level content at the right depth of knowledge and are making sense of the content in context. So that would earn a 2 for content. Let's look at the practices section a little bit slower, hopefully, maybe not, because that is a new section that we did not review when we met in June. And so we want to make sure that we understand this section. So very important to having access to grade appropriate assignment. When you rate on the practice section for grade appropriate assignments, you're looking to understand to what extent do kids have opportunities to use the other 2 components of the science standards, to what extent do they have an opportunity to use the science and engineering practices and to use the cross-cutting concepts. So we're going to look at the first question and consider if kids have an opportunity to work with at least one science and engineering practice and if they're able to do so at the right level of rigor. So these are the 8 science and engineering practices that we talked about in June. And you also can look in the standards to look at what does it look like to do these things at a grade appropriate, grade band appropriate level, which is also part of the Tennessee science standards. Let me give you a minute to consider this question on your own. And so to avoid toggling through too many documents, what I would recommend that you do is look at the assignment and see if kids are doing any of these 8 things. Are they asking questions? Are they developing or using models all the way through the 8? And then we'll talk about if you think that's a yes or a no. Go ahead and take about 90 seconds to scan through that assignment and see if kids have an opportunity to do any of these 8 things. And just to give you a hint, when I'm looking for practices, I often look at what are the question stems that kids are being asked. If it's an open question or a closed question, if it's an open question, it tends to be more closely aligned to one of these 8 practices. Okay, let's do like a thumb up or a thumb down on this one. So you can show me if you're on your camera, that would be great, with a thumb up or a thumb down, or you can use the reaction if you are not able to be on camera right now. Did you see evidence of kids using the science and engineering practices in this assignment, or did you not see evidence of that? I saw a thumb from Brittany. And then I'm seeing some other maybe unsure. So let me show you how I would have rated this. I would have rated this a yes. Brittany, do you mind coming off mute and telling us why you give it a thumbs up?
So for this one, I just went down, I immediately went down to the reflection questions, and there's actually a couple different questions in this. Let me pull it up, hang on just a second. So if you go, I'm on page 4 of 6, and it actually asks the kids to make a claim, and it wants them to back up the claim using the reasoning, what scientific reasoning they have for that. And then also under the reflection, it tells them, it asks them the question number 1, it says the experiment has one type of observable feature associated with kinetic energy. Based on their learning through the task, what other observable features are associated with the change in kinetic energy? So that was the 2 things I looked at.
Great, thanks, Brittany. And I had screenshotted the same part of the assignment here where kids are asked to create a claim. So one of the science and engineering practices is engaging in argument from evidence. So kids are asked to create an argument from evidence here on this assignment. And if you had more time to look at this assignment and you looked at the matrix, it does say that in 6th through 8th grade, kids are making this evident using scientific reasoning. And so they could have crafted this argument from the content that they learned in the text previously, or in the other parts of the explore part of the task as well, would have been scientific reasoning that they could have used to engage in this argument. So that is yes. Okay, so then same thing for the next question. Well, same but different. Do kids have the opportunity to use the cross-cutting concepts? And we said that there were 7 of those. And again, those are 7 themes that are true across all of science. We want kids making connections to these themes in an intentional way in their assignments to develop a bigger understanding of the interconnectedness of science. So those 7 are shown here on the screen. Again, I want you to take 90 seconds to scan through the assignment and see if you see reference to any of these 7 themes. My hint would be, again, look at the question stems, and then also it looks like it, you may see the language directly called out in the words of the assignment as well. So take a look at that, and then we'll see again if you give it a yes or a no. Okay, so about a minute to scan it. Would you give this a yes for access to cross-cutting concepts, or a no, kids don't have access to use the cross-cutting concepts? Okay. Great, Amanda, I'm in agreement that this is a yes. Do you mind telling us which one you picked and why?
Well, in question 2, it talks specifically about energy and matter. There's probably a few others that you could argue with, that it also hits on the cross-cutting concepts, like cause and effect with the demonstration of the ramp with more kinetic energy, the higher the marble rolls and things like that. But definitely states in question 2, energy and matter.
Great. So I agree, we see direct reference to the language of energy and matter a couple of places in the assignment itself as a big idea that kids are working to understand. And if you look at again, there's also in the Tennessee Standards a matrix for understanding related to cross-cutting concepts for energy and matter. It talks about understanding that energy can be transformed, because we see a lot of reference to throughout the task. So, there it is right there, energy and matter. So again, a 2. So 2 2s is sufficient opportunity. This assignment so far is doing great. Let's move on to talk about relevance. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about relevance, which I feel like is special to science, maybe it really isn't. If you are, for science, if you do the content section well and you do the practices section well, there is a little double dipping. Relevance is easier to get a sufficient rating on, particularly if you look at this first indicator, which is about are the standards connected to phenomenon or a design challenge? We've already thought about that when we think about the content. And so if it's a yes there, then it's a yes here. So there is a little bit of double dipping that I think happens with content and relevance for science. And I think that that's okay. And it's really important to just continue to reemphasize that we don't want kids memorizing knowledge separate from the real way that it exists in their world. So we're talking about all three questions and then let you look at all three. So the first one I just said is, does it make use of a phenomenon or a design challenge? The second question is thinking about how is the content connected to the unique experiences of the lives of the students that are receiving it? So this is a question where, depending on the context of the community where kids are experiencing the assignment, you might give it a yes or you might give it a no, depending on if this is specific to what kids experience in their own community. So there are two kind of questions there, two guiding questions to think about, which is, does the assignment connect to kids' prior experience in the context of their homes, neighborhoods, or communities? And if it doesn't do that, it needs to take advantage of students' questions. Really, kids are curious naturally, so taking advantage of students' curiosity is a way to make it uniquely meaningful to the students that are experiencing the assignment. And then the third question is about sharing developing thinking. Do kids have an opportunity to clarify, justify, interpret, express their developing thinking and their ideas about the content? So I'm going to give you some practice time right now on this. I'd like you to try to do all three indicators, a yes or a no for each of these questions on relevance. Take 2 minutes to do that, and then we'll talk about it. All right, let's talk about what you noticed when you looked at this assignment in terms of relevance. I will go ahead and give a gimme on the first one here, which we know that this assignment connects to a phenomenon. We already talked about that when we talked about content. Let's do thumbs up or thumbs down for the second question. Did you give this a yes with a thumb up or a no with the thumb down? See, no thumbs, which makes me think that you're less confident on your selection for this one. There's no maybe, so give me a guess, a yes or a no. Okay, still see some confused faces. We'll talk about it. Well, I'll show you the answer, then we'll talk about it. I gave it a no. maybe there's some folks that wanted to give it a no, but felt like this was a perfect assignment, so you thought you should give it a yes. If you gave it a no, you're correct. And a yes on sharing their developing thinking. So let me show you why on those. So first one, we know that it has use of a phenomenon to get the hands rubbing together with the heat and the speed of fast and slow friction. I gave this a no for the second because it doesn't make use of an experience that is unique to the context of students, homes, or communities. And then the second part is, does it make use of students' questions? There is this question at the very end that says, now that you've learned more about the science of moving objects, what questions do you still have? That, I think, does not meet the bar for making use of students' questions. It doesn't take advantage of students' questions, it just asks what they had. Those questions were positioned differently in the assignment. It might have earned a yes for making use of students' questions. Like if that came up way earlier in the assignment and we used those questions to explore some of the ideas, that would be a sufficient use of taking advantage of students' questions. But just asking at the end if what questions do you have does not meet the bar for that. And then the third one about kids sharing their developing thinking. So there was, I think, a lot of opportunities for kids to share their developing thinking in this assignment. We already talked about the CER claim that kids are doing, CER response that kids are doing earlier. And in the elaborate, there's an opportunity for kids to talk with a partner to share their thinking and then to write down their response. So for that reason, that was yes. So the loophole, though, is here. So that actually still does earn a 2. This is the only of the 3 indicators where if you don't get all of them, you can still earn a sufficient opportunity. So a 1, a minimal opportunity, kids need to have access to the phenomenon, but they might not do the other 2. And then for a 2, you need to either connect in a meaningful way for students' experiences or share their developing thinking. So this is still actually earned 2. So overall, strong assignment. Wanted to ground us in a really strong one to start before we begin to think about what you would do if you didn't see something that looked this strong in the classrooms that you're working in. To give it like an overall determination if something is grade appropriate or not grade appropriate, we can combine all of the scores and get an overall score. And so when we rated assignments on the opportunity myth, anything that got a 4 or above, we counted as grade appropriate, and anything 3 or below was not grade appropriate. And then it could be a really useful experience in your schools if you wanted to do a collection one day of just pick up the assignments, look at what the assignments look like in your building, and you can figure out what % of assignments get a 4 or better, what % of assignments are not grade appropriate because they get a 3 or below, to give you kind of an overall sense about the access to strong assignments in the schools that you work at. Okay, there is the section there on the end, which is about if students met the demands of the standards. And so if you're using this tool as like a collection tool in your school building where you're collecting a bunch of assignments at once, you might actually collect finished work too. And you can collect that finished work and also rate it as whether or not students met the demand of the assignment or not, to then be able to say, this percentage of our assignments were grade appropriate and this % of our students are being successful on these assignments and meeting the demands of the standards. We don't have complete student work today, so we're not taking a look at that, but that is like when thinking about the application of this tool to improve science instruction in your building, you can use it to look at the quality of the assignment itself and how kids are doing compared to the standards by looking at samples of completed student work. Okay, so that is our guided practice. We did that together. Now I'm going to give you an opportunity to do some independent practice, some collaboration, some thinking about what you would do if you are looking at assignments in your building and they don't look perfect, they don't get all 2s, and how you would prioritize feedback and development for those teachers. So there is this 7th grade assignment in your folder. It has these 2 pictures of text that show the boy with the slide festivals and the basketball. And we're gonna have some independent rating time, and then we'll have some group discussion time. Okay, and so I want you to use the tool on your own to rate it as an as a practice opportunity and understanding and clarifying your vision. Okay? But then when you get to your group, I'd really like you to spend a lot of time thinking about this number 2 question on the screen. If this was your teacher and you saw this assignment, what feedback would you want to give this teacher? What would be one glow and one grow that you would have for this teacher? And when we come back, I'll share the ratings, but we'll really focus on this feedback piece for the teacher because that's how you actually improve instruction. Our outcomes for students in your school is by developing your teachers. But you're going to have, like I said, 5 minutes on your own first to look at the assignment, rate the assignment, and then we'll come back together and repeat the directions before we go to breakout rooms. So it is 11:12 now, and so got until 11:17 to do your own ratings on this 7th grade assignment. Okay. That's some time to look at the assignment to begin to think about the rating. We're going to send you to breakout rooms to talk about the ratings and then to really focus the conversation on the glow and the grow. So you just want to like really quickly whip around on your overall score on the assignment, but don't spend time going through each indicator. Instead, really focus on like overall, based on what you see in the organization of this tool. What do you think is the strength of this assignment, and what feedback would you give this teacher if you were coaching them? Okay, so Stephen, you can send us to breakout rooms. We will have 5 minutes and then we'll come back together and we'll focus our conversation on those glows and grows.
And for anybody watching this video separately, go ahead and as your teams right now, do the same exercise and pause the video.
Okay, thanks for giving that a chat and taking a look at that assignment. Like I said, I really want to focus on, I'll share the ratings with you, but then really talk our conversation about the glows and the grows. Overall, this is not a strong grade appropriate assignment. It actually earns you 0 across all domains. And it's not grade appropriate. Though I think that this is, would not be a shocking assignment to see in a science classroom that can be often heavily focused on text-based instruction. And having a text is a great activity for kids to engage in. There is actually one of the science and engineering practices that's about obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. So this would be obtaining information, but doesn't actually meet the depth of the progression to that science and engineering practice. So it's not all bad here, but let's actually focus our conversation, like I said, on the glows and the grows that you talked about. So let's go with ecology. Someone from the ecology group, which was Amy, Brittany, Emily, and Katrina, could you share one thing that you talked about as a strength or a glow in this assignment?
So what we discussed for a glow, that it was good that they did use text to get that vocabulary in there, but they needed to do something with they needed to have the students do something with the text. So it was great that they had the text there that the students needed to read through. We just need to kind of work on what the students would actually do with it.
Great, thanks, Brittany. That's previewed out my own explanation too. So thanks for helping to make sure that we are aligned on some of the strengths of this assignment. I noted that it is minimally aligned to some of the content that is there in 7th grade. There is 7LS 1.5, I think, which is about the body systems. However, it really focuses on the interdependence of the systems and not just knowing the organism, the organs in the system itself. So there's some alignment to grade level standard. I would probably call that partial alignment to a grade level standard. And the use of the text helps to support students' ability to obtain information, though does not reach the depth of the science and engineering practice itself. Let's move on to grows. Let's go with, let's see, thermodynamics. This was Caroline, Cody, Jack, and Scott. What were some of the grows that you discussed for this assignment?
I think we mentioned that it's a good resource to use in a lesson, but it's not in and of itself a lesson. Like, it's a great text component that you can use. And we talked about how we liked that the visual was there, but we would expect, like, how are you getting the students to interact? Like, the only thing they really liked based on the lesson document is that the kid was wearing Jordans, because if you notice, they say he's wearing 23. So they're very interested in that. So how do we get their questions? How do we get more interaction with the content from them? And then how do we connect to their lives a little bit more? So maybe as a component, it's good, but the grow is just actually turned into an active lesson as opposed to simply being a sort of docile piece of paper.
Yeah, I really like that reflection, Scott. Because I think when thinking about growing teachers, when I look at an assignment before and observe a lesson, usually I might have some notes for the teacher for feedback, but I also creates a list of questions for me that I want to think about or explore when I'm in the classroom for the observation itself, right? So like, okay, great, you have a text, but like I really want to see how you're using that text so that it can actually meet the demands of the standard. And so by looking at that up front, it helps you to have some idea of what you might want to investigate when you're observing in the classroom. So I, in my second bullet point here, reference something similar to, which like after reading the text, gives students a task to complete that requires them to create a claim and defend their thinking. That's one way that you could use the text to focus on a science and engineering practice. There's other ways you could do it, but I just tried to write an example of something that was sort of specific. And then also there's no reference to a phenomenon here that we see in the assignment itself. It's not grounded in any real world experience that kids need to unpack or make meaning of using the information in the text itself. So I want to show you, and I think that's like probably the highest leverage piece of feedback is actually the connection to the phenomenon. If you're to improve the relevance and the content score of this assignment, you would have to include a phenomenon. And so in our last minute here, I just wanted to point you to this one resource, which is there in the Science Teaching Resource Bank, which is linked in your document. There's a bunch of links used to help explore phenomenon, because that can be really hard. Like I'm not have a science background. I don't know how to help a teacher come up with one. And if you use those links there's one in the Louisiana one specifically, which talks about endurance athletes and uses Michael Phelps as an example to explore the interconnectedness of body systems and how athletes cargo load to help their performance, right? So like this is a great resource for you to use in collaboration with your teachers in development of them, and not feeling like you need to have all the answers yourself when supporting teachers to make these changes in the assignment. So that's for you, and that's also for them. Okay, so we have reached 11:30. We have reached our break point. We've got a strong foundation and what good materials should look like. And like I said, we're going to build on that and thinking about if you've got good materials, what should good instruction look like when we come back together in about 2 hours. Before you sign off, I do need you to complete this attendance survey, which just marks your completion here for the first half of today's training. Chris is going to put the link in the chat. I put my email address there if you want to follow up with any questions related to vision or grade appropriate assignments or anything in science. I'm happy to talk. You can reach out to me. I will be back this afternoon. So if you want to fill out that survey and then log off, we will see you back here in 2 hours. And if you have questions, I'll hang on here for a minute as well. So thanks so much for this great first half and look forward to seeing you after a little stretch break.